In the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, a single royal portrait sparked a storm that no one saw coming. When King Charles unveiled the latest official family image, a chilling absence was felt across the nation. Camilla's grandchildren were nowhere in sight. Instead, the spotlight fell solely on Catherine's children, igniting whispers of favoritism, rejection, and a deeper royal rift long buried beneath ceremonial smiles. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The unveiling had been orchestrated with all the pomp expected of a reigning monarch, a gilded frame, a perfectly choreographed reveal, and an expectant press gallery leaning into every pixel. Yet the photograph's content sent shockwaves through the public and royal circles alike. The exclusion was not subtle. It was glaring. While Prince George stood tall with a faint echo of his father's resolve, and Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis flanked him in youthful grace, there was no trace of Camilla's side of the family. No, Laura. No, Tom. Not even the youngest of Camilla's grandchildren who, by now, had grown accustomed to occasional royal visibility. Their absence wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. The public erupted with questions. Social media platforms ignited with trending hashtags calling out what many labeled a calculated erasure. Commentators on morning shows and primetime panels debated whether this was a subtle shift in royal representation or a full-blown rejection of Camilla's family ties. Newspapers ran contrasting headlines, some applauding the clear nod to the direct royal bloodline, others condemning what they called a cruel dismissal of innocent children. Behind palace gates, the murmurs were even darker. Rumours circulated that this wasn't the first time Camilla's grandchildren had been pushed aside, but it was the first time the entire world was watching. What added an even deeper chill to the situation was King Charles's own demeanour during the unveiling. Eyes scanning the crowd but betraying no emotion, his silence stood in stark contrast to the growing thunder outside the palace. His expression measured, fixed, perhaps even rehearsed, offered no room for questions. The message was embedded in the image itself. This was not a portrait of a modern blended family. This was a coronation of legacy, lineage, and blood. Yet, for many, the emotional undertone couldn't be ignored. These were children, young hearts, now caught in the crossfire of image control and institutional survival. The idea that Camilla's grandchildren had been visibly erased from a moment meant to symbolize unity struck a raw nerve. While Catherine's children were elevated as the face of the future, Camilla's kin had been quietly stripped of their presence, their place, and perhaps their importance. Some insiders hinted at last-minute changes to the image, decisions taken at the highest level with icy precision. Others claimed the absence had been planned all along, weeks in advance, and carefully kept under wraps until the final reveal. As the media frenzy intensified and palace spokespeople dodged questions with vague remarks about focus and representation, the cracks in the royal foundation deepened. This wasn't just about a portrait. It was about power, blood, and who truly belonged in the House of Windsor's future. And in this silent reordering, the ripple effects had only just begun. But behind the velvet curtains and polished silver frames, what drove Charles to such a ruthless choice? The answer lies in the silent war that's been waging for years. Long before the portrait was ever released, Camilla had already sensed something was amiss. Sources claim she privately begged King Charles to include her grandchildren to no avail. What followed was a cold, calculated silence that left even Camilla's inner circle fearing she was no longer being heard, not as queen consort, but as a grandmother cast aside. It began as a quiet unease. Whispers in the palace corridors, hushed conversations that stopped when she entered the room, and a series of schedule changes that, on paper, looked harmless but signaled a deeper unraveling. Camilla, once confident in her position beside the king, found herself asking more questions and receiving fewer answers. Her first appeal was personal, a soft moment in their private residence, where she raised the matter with Charles. She reminded him that her grandchildren had been present at past events, subtly woven into royal engagements to foster a modern image of unity. But this time, Charles barely responded. His eyes remained fixed on the fireplace, and his silence echoed louder than any denial. That night, Camilla reportedly wrote him a heartfelt letter, one not meant for the record, but for his heart. It was never acknowledged. What followed next shook her inner circle. Aides who had once been warm now turned polite and mechanical. Meetings were moved. Doors once wide open now required permission. Insiders suggest there were 2 late-night encounters between Camilla and Charles, both ending in tension. One advisor claimed she left the room in tears. Another said she looked as if she had aged 10 years in one night. She reminded him of the promises made in private, the quiet understanding that although her family bore no royal blood, they had earned their place through loyalty and discretion. But Charles's mind, it seemed, had already shifted toward legacy, one that favored bloodlines over blended families. Meanwhile, the palace aides, those silent movers of royal machinery, had already begun shifting their loyalties. A new set of advisors, many with close ties to Catherine's household, began taking the reins. Camilla's old guard was pushed aside, reassigned, or quietly dismissed. Decisions she once had input on were now finalized before reaching her desk. And while she clung to composure in public, behind the scenes, she was unraveling. The true blow, however, came not from her husband's silence or her staff's betrayal, but from her grandchildren's heartbreak. They asked why they weren't included, why their friends saw the portrait but couldn't find them in it. One insider shared that Camilla was overheard whispering, "How do I explain to them that they're not royal enough?" The wound ran deeper than protocol. It bled into identity, into the very fabric of belonging, and in the hearts of those children, a quiet confusion settled, mingled with shame. Camilla had spent years trying to merge her world into the royal tapestry, but now, that fabric was being unstitched before her eyes. Those closest to the inner circle confirmed what she had feared all along. She had never been part of the bloodline plan. Her presence had always been tolerated, never truly embraced. Her grandchildren were never considered royal heirs, no matter how present, polite, or poised they were in public. The portrait had only made that truth undeniable. But while Camilla fought to protect her legacy, another force was quietly gaining ground, and it came dressed not in jewels, but in quiet determination. She never raised her voice, but her presence grew louder with every passing season. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has long been seen as the monarchy's future, but recent actions hint she may already be steering it. The exclusion of Camilla's kin, some say, was not Charles's decision alone. From quiet beginnings as the Duchess of Cambridge to becoming a figure of serene power, Catherine's evolution within the royal hierarchy has been nothing short of surgical. Observers had long admired her grace, but few noticed the subtle consolidation of influence taking place behind palace walls. The shift was slow but deliberate. Over time, key decision-makers began orbiting around her rather than around the Queen Consort. Catherine wasn't just adapting to royal life, she was reshaping it, brick by silent brick. And while Camilla's world appeared increasingly unstable, Catherine's stature only grew more rooted, more unshakable. In state events and private meetings alike, Catherine remained composed, deliberate, never visibly grasping for power. But power, it seemed, was gravitating toward her regardless. Public appearances began to reflect this invisible shift. Charles, often criticized for wavering public approval, seemed to lean on Catherine's image more than ever. Strategic engagements where Catherine appeared alongside the king were met with a surge of positive media coverage, as if her presence brought a halo effect he desperately needed. While Camilla attended fewer functions and looked increasingly withdrawn, Catherine's image was polished, purposeful, ever-present. It was clear to many within the institution that something unspoken had changed. Catherine was no longer preparing to support the monarchy. She was preparing to lead it. Palace insiders describe a growing circle of influence forming quietly around her. Advisors, once loyal to Charles or Camilla, were reportedly shifting allegiance. Long-term strategists began seeking her perspective before major public decisions. This wasn't a coup, it was a coronation without a crown, and Catherine played her part with impeccable subtlety. She never overstepped, never claimed what hadn't been offered yet. Somehow, the room seemed to turn in her direction whenever a future vision of the monarchy was discussed. To many inside the firm, Catherine wasn't simply the Princess of Wales. She had become the monarchy's most valuable strategist, its true anchor, as whispered in the corridors. The contrast between her quiet ascendancy and Camilla's unravelling could not have been more glaring. As Camilla publicly wrestled with the emotional fallout of her grandchildren's exclusion, Catherine's silence was interpreted not as indifference, but as intentional restraint. She neither condemned nor consoled. Instead, she stood firmly beside Charles, her presence offering the reassurance he no longer seemed able to project on his own. While Camilla was sidelined in both public imagery and internal influence, Catherine emerged as the stabilizing force, poised, calm, resolute. And though no official titles had changed, the palace's internal dynamics were shifting with unmistakable momentum. Rumors began swirling that Catherine's influence extended beyond appearances, that she had quietly backed the decision to focus future royal representation on her children alone. While no one could confirm her direct involvement, the pattern was clear. Every step taken in recent months aligned perfectly with Catherine's long-standing values: protect the core, elevate the future, preserve the image. And as her children became the visible symbols of continuity, Catherine became the invisible architect of a redefined royal future. Yet the portrait was just the beginning. What followed was a strategic erasure, executed with chilling precision. Days after the portrait went public, reports surfaced of deliberate edits, Camilla's grandchildren removed not only from the canvas, but from upcoming event guest lists, promotional material, and even palace archives. This wasn't an oversight. This was a campaign. What initially seemed like a symbolic exclusion soon began to unravel into something far more orchestrated. Behind the grandeur of the portrait lay a series of decisions so calculated they stunned even the most seasoned royal insiders. It started with the royal event programs, printed brochures that traditionally list every guest of significance, including extended family. Multiple versions, sent to private printers weeks prior, had initially included Camilla's grandchildren. Palace insiders who dared to ask why were met with a new kind of silence, one that felt enforced, not accidental. And then came the leaks, not from tabloids, but from within the palace itself. A confidential email chain, accessed by a former aide and shared under strict anonymity, showed detailed exclusion orders. The language was direct, focused solely on the direct heirs. Minimize visual presence of non-lineal relatives. No repeat of past family blending in official narratives. These weren't suggestions. They were mandates, and they bore the signature of someone at the very top, King Charles himself. His approval, scrawled across digital memos, was irrefutable. The decision had not only been approved, it had been initiated. Staff who raised concerns were quietly pulled aside. Non-disclosure agreements were updated and reinforced. The few who refused to cooperate were reassigned or edged out. According to a palace employee who has since left her post, there was a palpable fear creeping through the lower ranks. "It was clear," she said. "You don't ask about the grandchildren. Not anymore." That unspoken rule began to spread like wildfire through every department, from communications to event planning to the royal archives. Even past footage was reportedly re-evaluated for re-editing. Then, in a moment that broke the illusion of royal unity, Camilla was seen visibly distressed during a high-profile charity event. Her speech was interrupted by emotion she could no longer mask. Cameras caught her trembling hands, her forced smile, the deep inhale before continuing. To those who knew the truth, that moment said everything. She wasn't mourning just an omission. She was grieving a legacy stolen in real time. The final blow came from the photographer's assistant, an anonymous source who revealed the shocking reality of the portrait session. Initial groupings had included more family members, but multiple retakes were ordered, each one narrowing the frame, centering only on the heirs. By the final capture, Camilla's grandchildren were not just cut out, they were never even called back. The assistant described the atmosphere as surgical, with instructions coming from a separate communications room, not the studio floor. What should have been a moment of celebration had turned into an execution of visibility. This wasn't simply about who stood beside whom. It was about rewriting the visual future of the monarchy, one crop at a time. Erased from paper, silenced in press, vanished from history in the making, Camilla's family had been redacted, and not by accident. But when it came to family portraits, legacy was only part of the motive. Power was the real prize, and the next move would redraw the royal future entirely. This wasn't just about children, it was about lineage, survival, and reshaping the public's perception of monarchy. King Charles knew the crown could only thrive if it was rebranded, and Camilla's line, tied by blood only to her past, posed a risk he could no longer ignore. Behind palace doors, a quiet but seismic recalibration had begun. The monarchy, already battered by years of public scrutiny and generational shifts, was in need of a clear direction, one that aligned tradition with modern sensibility. And in every polling report placed on the king's desk, one truth repeated itself. The public's trust, admiration, and hopes lay not with the Queen Consort's extended family, but with the heirs born of William and Catherine. George, Charlotte, and Louis represented continuity, stability, and the unbroken Windsor line. In contrast, Camilla's grandchildren, though polite, respectable, and well-mannered, symbolized a chapter the public had never fully embraced. The difference wasn't personal, it was institutional. Advisors, both old and newly embedded, began drafting proposals for what they termed the Streamlining Initiative. Their recommendations were strikingly blunt. Strip the monarchy of peripheral figures. Recenter the narrative on direct succession. Eliminate ambiguities in bloodline hierarchy. The word optics appeared frequently in internal memos. So did phrases like controlled legacy and elimination of future claims. And it was in these confidential meetings, often held late at night under strict clearance, that the fate of Camilla's grandchildren was sealed not by malice, but by cold strategy. Charles, long seen as a monarch torn between emotion and duty, chose duty with chilling resolve. He understood what was at stake. In an era defined by image and perception, even the slightest confusion over who represented the crown could splinter decades of royal authority. Camilla's family, though not of Windsor blood, were increasingly being seen at engagements, in programs, and on social media platforms curated by royal photographers. There was growing concern that if left unchecked, they might assume entitlements that blurred the sacred lines of succession. And in a monarchy where symbolism holds as much weight as law, even a child's presence in a photograph could shift public interpretation. Whispers from international royal watchers only added to the pressure. Advisors from allied European monarchies warned Charles that maintaining a clean, traceable bloodline was critical to future legitimacy. The blended family experiment, while noble in private life, would never be accepted as part of the sovereign core. Charles, who once defied tradition for love, now found himself upholding it with iron conviction. His love for Camilla remained, but his loyalty to the crown had become absolute, and in this new vision, there was simply no room for ambiguity. Internal reports reveal that the plan was pitched not just as a public relations maneuver, but as a long-term preservation strategy. One document, reportedly circulated among senior staff, titled Future of the Firm, listed Catherine's children as the monarchy's foundation pillars. No mention of Camilla's side. No space for compromise. It was a blueprint for a purified legacy, one that would be unshakable, unchallengeable, and undeniably Windsor. And though Charles didn't speak these intentions aloud, his actions screamed them across every portrait, appearance, and guest list. The battle wasn't about who was loved. Camilla's grandchildren had become casualties of a war they never asked to fight, in a conflict between symbolism and blood, between heart and heritage. Charles had made his choice, and the monarchy, streamlined and sharpened, would now move forward with ruthless clarity. But while Charles executed his plan with royal authority, Camilla was unraveling, and her next move would risk everything. In a confrontation that sources say left King Charles visibly shaken, Camilla broke royal protocol and demanded answers. For the first time in years, the palace corridors echoed with raised voices, and the queen consort's fury was no longer hidden behind polite smiles. The breaking point came not during a grand event or public spectacle, but within the confines of Clarence House, far from the press, far from the public eye. Camilla, usually composed and careful, reportedly stormed into a private meeting with the king, unannounced and uninvited. What began as a conversation turned quickly into a confrontation. According to those with knowledge of the exchange, Camilla's voice cracked with restrained anguish as she questioned the portrait, the deliberate exclusion of her grandchildren, and the cold manner in which it had been orchestrated. Charles, who had grown increasingly reliant on protocol and palace counsel, listened in silence. But it was not the silence of compassion, it was the silence of finality. Witnesses said Camilla was trembling, tears catching in her eyes, but she was unrelenting. The woman who had withstood decades of public scrutiny, who had walked beside Charles through scandal and ascension, was now reduced to pleading for the inclusion of her family, for recognition, for dignity. She reminded him of the years spent shaping a modern image of royalty together, of the sacrifices made to present a united front. But Charles, unmoved, stood by his choice. The exclusion had been intentional. Reversal, he reportedly told her, would undermine everything that had just been set in motion. The emotional weight of that refusal was devastating. For Camilla, this wasn't just a political blow, it was personal devastation. Rumors began to swirl that she had considered walking away from her public duties entirely. One aide confided that she had gone dark, refusing scheduled calls, delaying public appearances, and retreating into a private wing of the estate. Her son, Tom Parker Bowles, allegedly confronted senior staff, demanding to know why his children had been erased from the royal frame. The tension was no longer private, it had spilled into the corridors, affecting even those who'd remained loyal to both sides. Staff were warned to tread carefully. Any discussion of the portrait, Camilla's family, or the fallout was forbidden. NDAs were reinforced. Meetings were restructured. But even silence couldn't smother the emotional fissures widening within the household. The Queen Consort, once central to Charles's every move, had become an afterthought in his new plan. She knew it. And worse, so did her grandchildren, who now looked to her for answers she no longer had the power to provide. Camilla's position, once seen as immovable, was now perilously fragile. Every glance from the press, every whisper in the palace, seemed to chip away at what little ground she had left to stand on. Her legacy, once blended carefully into the monarchy's future, now appeared to be unraveling strand by strand. She was fighting for more than public appearances. She was fighting for her family's very place in royal history. And in doing so, she exposed a deep and dangerous fracture at the heart of the crown. But the crown doesn't wait for emotions, and Catherine, whether intentionally or not, was about to take the final step in this silent coup. In what is now known internally as the future monarch's only mandate, Charles and his senior circle began drawing harsh lines. Appearances, portraits, even balcony invitations were to be restricted to those directly in line. The message? The monarchy would no longer be diluted. This wasn't simply an adjustment of ceremonial optics, it was a purge. The edict came swiftly and without room for negotiation. In closed-door briefings with royal communications, staff and protocol officers, the new standard was announced. Only those in the direct line of succession were to be publicly promoted, positioned, or prioritized. The days of a blended family image were over. What replaced it was a royal narrative so focused, so pointed, that it left little doubt about who belonged and who didn't. It wasn't personal. It was surgical. Every photograph, every public-facing event, and every media collaboration now revolved around a single axis: the heirs of William and Catherine. The three children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, became the faces of a legacy renewed. Their imagery saturated everything from official holiday cards to global news coverage. Palace branding initiatives positioned them as the embodiment of royal modernity, continuity, and stability. Their smiles, their school visits, their poised waves from afar, It all served one purpose: remind the world that the monarchy's future was safe in their small, capable hands. And in doing so, another message was embedded deep between the lines. Camilla's grandchildren, no matter how present in her heart, were absent from the crown's future. Soon after the mandate, invitations for upcoming state events began to shift. Names that had once appeared regularly on guest lists were now absent, without explanation or apology. Camilla's side of the family, once subtly woven into the background of royal engagements, was now entirely removed. Even in private garden parties and ceremonial functions, their absence was unmistakable. And Catherine's silence spoke volumes. She didn't endorse the change in words, but she didn't need to. Her nods beside the king, her graceful acceptance of the new protocol, her measured responses when asked about the future, they all confirmed one thing. She had aligned herself with this new royal course, and there was no turning back. Perhaps the most symbolic shift came with the restructured balcony appearances. Traditionally, a moment of unity, celebration, and national pride, the royal balcony had been a place where extended members gathered in visible harmony. But this time, it was stripped to the core. Only the king, the direct heirs, and their immediate bloodline stood before the world. No Camilla's family, no ambiguity. The reconfiguration was jarring, even to veteran watchers of royal tradition. The public took note. Commentators debated. But the message had already sunk in. This was the monarchy rebranded for a cleaner, more controlled future. Media outlets quickly adapted. Articles, features, and photo spreads now focused exclusively on Catherine's children. Tabloids that once speculated on blended royal dynamics were now aligning with a singular narrative, one that glorified the next generation of Windsors. And just like that, the rewritten story began to solidify in the public consciousness. And while the public admired the poised young faces on magazine covers, a storm was brewing, one that would split the palace even deeper. Unbeknownst to Camilla, 3 senior royals, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Catherine, had allegedly met weeks earlier in a private room within Windsor's stone walls. What they discussed could change the future of the monarchy forever, and it had no place for Camilla's descendants. The gathering was not scheduled on any formal calendar. It wasn't attended by aides, and no minutes were taken. But what occurred behind that closed door, according to whispers from palace insiders, reshaped the royal family's course with quiet finality. Princess Anne, revered for her unwavering dedication to duty and her razor-sharp instinct for survival, had grown increasingly concerned about the monarchy's public image. She saw the institution not as a relic of the past, but as a fragile construct that required absolute clarity to endure the modern age. To Anne, the blurred lines created by blended families and emotional inclusivity risked the very foundation of what the monarchy symbolized. She had witnessed too many scandals, too many fractures, and this time she intended to act before another storm could strike. Prince Edward, ever the quiet strategist, rarely placed himself in the center of attention, but his loyalty to the crown was unshakable. He understood Anne's concerns. He shared them. And in Catherine, they saw not just a future queen, but the central figure through whom the monarchy could anchor itself for the next generation. Together, the 3 of them crafted a plan not to dismantle, but to fortify. It was not about cruelty. It was about control. The monarchy needed to speak with one voice, one vision, one lineage. And that meant narrowing the narrative to the line of succession born of William and Catherine. Camilla's grandchildren, while beloved privately, had no constitutional place, no royal title, no claim. Their presence, though innocent, blurred the crown's silhouette in the public eye, and so their absence would become necessity. According to multiple sources, a document was drafted, an unofficial agreement outlining the redefinition of public-facing royal representation. It didn't revoke anyone's rights, because Camilla's grandchildren had none to begin with. But it solidified the new boundaries. No extended visibility, no ceremonial roles, no inclusion in future portraits, unless expressly approved by the reigning monarch. And here lies the twist. King Charles allegedly signed it. With the stroke of a pen, he endorsed what some now call the Windsor realignment. There was no formal announcement, no public acknowledgement. But behind the facade of royal unity, a shift had occurred so profound that its consequences would echo for generations. This coalition, Anne, Edward, Catherine, was never made official, but its influence grew rapidly. Staff began referring to the trio in hushed tones as the preservation circle. They were not interested in titles or theatrics. They wanted strength, continuity, order. And for that vision to prevail, every unnecessary branch had to be quietly pruned. Camilla, unaware of this covert pact, continued to defend her family's place, never knowing the decision had already been made before the portrait was even framed. But while alliances formed in shadows, one final twist was yet to emerge, and it would send shockwaves through every royal corridor. Just days after the storm around the portrait reached its peak, a letter surfaced, written by the late Queen Elizabeth herself. Buried within her private estate and recently uncovered by a trusted royal archivist, it revealed a vision for the future that excluded Camilla's line entirely. The discovery came not from a political aid or media leak, but from within Windsor's own archival sanctum. A sealed envelope marked, "For the Sovereign's eyes only," was found tucked behind a collection of personal diaries. Inside was a letter penned in the Queen's unmistakable handwriting, a message written not in cold legal terms, but in emotional, deeply reflective language. It spoke of legacy, of preserving the purity of the Windsor line, and of her belief that while love had its place, blood had its duty. The words struck with surgical precision. She had outlined her hope that the monarchy remain anchored in direct lineage, that public representation be reserved solely for heirs by birth, not by marriage. When the letter was quietly shown to Charles, those present claimed his demeanour shifted. What had once been seen as a ruthless political strategy now had the backing of a moral compass, the monarch's mother. Though her words held no legal weight, they became a shield. Charles reportedly told aides, "She saw this coming. She knew what had to be done." It was the justification he had been waiting for, the confirmation he needed to silence any last trace of guilt. William and Catherine, upon reading the contents, were said to be visibly moved. For them, it was a vindication, a sign that the Queen herself had entrusted them with the future of the crown. But for Camilla, it was the final wound. When she was shown the letter in private, she reportedly broke down completely. Not even her position as Queen Consort could protect her from the echo of a monarch who had always harboured quiet reservations. To know that Elizabeth had envisioned a future where Camilla's bloodline was erased from history left her hollow. Her tears were not just for herself, but for her grandchildren, now immortalised as outsiders by the very woman whose throne she now stood beside. The moment the letter's existence was leaked, media frenzy erupted. Headlines branded it, "The Queen's Final Command." Commentators debated its impact, questioning whether love had ever truly triumphed over tradition in the House of Windsor. The public response was fractured. Some hailed the Queen's foresight, others condemned the coldness of it all. A nation that had mourned Elizabeth now found itself questioning the mercy of her legacy. And yet, the damage was done. The portrait was no longer just a photograph, it was prophecy. An emblem of loyalty upheld, of lines drawn in royal ink, and of a family forced to choose between heart and heritage. The Queen's letter was the final blow, a silent verdict delivered from beyond the grave. The portrait may have been just an image, but it told a story of loyalty, betrayal, and a kingdom redefining its bloodline. And in the shadows of 1,000 flashbulbs, the war for legacy quietly rages on. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.